Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Chat. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time. Lauren and I are here to pontificate and explain. So many different things going on. Lauren, I know one of the hot topics I'm getting asked about a lot, I'm sure you are as well, is the notion that everything is getting more expensive. But in particular, as it applies to pet parents, they're really seeing some hits, not only in the cost of things, but that good old shrinkflation of packages that were one size are now smaller. The quantity, the amount, etc., seems to also be that other pivot that's going on. And folks, if they haven't saved things from the past year or two, are kind of caught off guard of like, that's what it is. I thought my dog or cat was running through more food than they ever have or more treats quicker. But in reality, there's a lot of financial pressures hitting everybody.
Yeah, I remember the first time that happened when I had my store, and I probably would not have been so alerted to it if it hadn't been for the extreme overtures of the brand rep who was telling me how much better pricing was going to be on this particular product. And I was like, that's odd. Nothing ever goes down, and I was like, huh, okay. And just went on and on and on about it. So, of course, when the product came in, I'm scrutinizing it. And sure enough, if it wasn't 6 pounds less than what
Mm,
it was, and maybe $1 cheaper
right.
than previously, and I'm like, so basically, you raise the price per ounce or per pound. And he was like, well, and I'm like, that's not a savings. Um, it's unfortunate. Prices are going up in everything. And I think you'll see some of that maybe go down a little bit, but really, like I said, prices never go down. Once people, it's interesting because this happened with the pandemic. Prices went up because shipping issues and transportation issues and acquisition issues and, just all the shortages and everything else. But there was never anything that was going to come down. It's like when you charge people 3% for using a credit card, or you charge people fees over and above what's normal for purchasing something from you. I always look at that as that's the cost of running a business. So rather than call it out separately, you're supposed to do what's been done for forever, which is figure out what your margin needs to be so that you can cover all your costs, and then you raise your price accordingly, because calling it out separately seems to be an insult. Um, I know I recently did business a couple of weeks ago with a business that I said, so if I pay cash, is there any better pricing? No, but there will be. I'm like, great, how long? And they said, maybe a week or two. I'm fabulous. Happened to be in there the other day. And now it's did you want to pay cash or charge? I go, well, have you guys implemented any type of a savings yet? Well, if you use your charge card, we're going to charge you 3%. How is that a savings to me? To pay
Right.
cash. So it's all this trickery that is used to manipulate pricing. We thought it would come down after the pandemic, right? Because things would somewhat return back to normal. You'd be able to acquire things more easily. Shipping wouldn't be the disaster that it was. Transportation would be easier, and even when we saw price reductions, it didn't seem to correlate to what we were paying for products. I know that happened on the wholesale side of it. Well, of course, if it happens on the wholesale side, it gets passed on to retail, right?
Right.
So for the pet parent, what do? Maybe they were feeding a better type of food, like closer to real food, fresh food kind of thing. And then they found they couldn't do that because processed food is so much cheaper. And I literally had people crying in my store because they were so upset that they thought they were going to do their pet an injustice because they couldn't afford any longer. So it became all about how to work around that. So it was a doesn't have to be an all or nothing, you know. What can you do? Can you do this many days a week of that? Can you, maybe do one meal a day, or can you do it 3 times a week, or can you add it on top, do a 50-50? What can you do? And I'll work with you on that. I'll figure that out for you. I'll do all the math on it. We'll figure out what you can afford. And it's like that now. People will look at something and go, I can't afford to feed that to my dog. You and I have had the conversation because you have a real size dog and I have little pretend dogs. And so it's much easier and cheaper for me to feed my smaller sized kids than it would be for you two. So we'll talk about a food sometimes and you'll be like, oh, no, no, that would be this much a pound for me. And I'm like, absolutely, I get it. This much a meal, that's too much, I understand that. But it's not an all or nothing. So if you can do some of your own cooking and supplement that, if you can add it to whatever you're doing, a lot of people will feed a kibble as a base and add to it. If you get locked into the box that you place yourself in, you won't step outside of those boundaries to figure out a way to have the best of both. So whatever it is, whether it's veterinary care, grooming, feeding, supplies, things like that, there are shortcuts and ways to circumvent the cost. Yes, ideally, everyone would win the lottery tomorrow and we could all go out and buy the best of everything for our whole family. But that's not what's going to happen. And so we have to be really creative as to how we're going to skirt the cost and still do well, still do good by our animals.
Yeah, I love that you bring up there's never one way is a mantra I know you and I have talked about, for many years now. And one of the things when I'm hit with this, and I'll tell a lot of my folks, I'm like, well, give me an example. What are you ending up, spending your money on? And, there are some things like I think you and I both agree nutrition is, up towards the top of you want to maintain as much as a pro healthy base and approach as you can. And then there are those things. I love you talked about the grooming. I'm not going to groom Bella necessarily and trim the little areas that need to be trimmed and all the rest of that. But I can certainly cut back by taking her to the dog self wash. And I do that. And my daughter, my youngest, and I make a day out of it. And Bella is hilarious. Sometimes she loves it. One time she wanted to show us how much she hated it and actually ran through our screen door, breaking it
Oh,
down. So that was an extra cost. Uh, I was like, wow, super dog. But there are other things too, and we talk about nutrition, but there are so many wonderful, and I've been doing this forever. I don't buy treats, and I know that sounds ironic to some folks who know me and my background of companies I've invested in and been a part of. Certainly love the convenience of the treat companies and this and that, and there are some that I like more than others. But the reality is, 90+% of the treats that Bella ever gets, I'm making at home. And it's funny because as I've looked at, oh, it used to be, 12 ounces, then it was 8 ounces, then it was, 6 ounces. And another one that kills me is I think most of the folks out there that know me, I do own a freeze dryer, have for a number of years, and I've freeze dried a lot of different stuff for my dogs. And it's crazy to see the costs on that. So I love that you called out the cost per ounce. If you're looking for just the quickest, easiest, did this go up? Did this change? Just look at that. That cost per ounce will tell you. And frankly, the cost per ounce also gives you is this worth buying up? Because I think that's one of the other things that I see happening a lot now too. They'll have that super small size, which is attractively priced. But the reality is that's one or two feedings. And then it's like, well, now I got to go back. Or they've got this middle to higher one. And when you do the cost ratio and the cost per ounce, um, that's where you got to start to go, okay. And you got to feel comfortable with it. And then you got to look, and this is, that follow up. Could I be adding some of these things at home much cheaper if I prepared them? And, I know you and I have talked about over the years sous vide. I sous vide a lot of vegetables and meats and other things. And I mean, honestly, it's just hit a point where it's less expensive for me. And we've talked about in other episodes, especially when we're talking about our pets, because I can go get that expires today at the
Right.
supermarket, and I know it's good, typically for a longer period. That's a human, date, not a, oh my gosh, someone, I'll say, with the caveat of always use your best discretion. But that being said, I like that you work with the folks to say, hey, look, what can you do? Where can we make adjustments? Because I'm getting that sense that that people feel like I'm just letting, Fifi or Fufu down because I'm not doing what I've done for the last 3 years. And now I'm undoing it all into this and that. It's balance over time. Okay.
Well, and people are overwhelmed. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, there's so much in the day to day. All the costs are going up and everything, right? Across the board. That it's like, I got to think about pet food too, or pet supplies as well. I had a client who had a job change and she came to me. I had gotten her into raw feeding. Her kids were doing phenomenally well. And she came to me distressed because there had been a financial change in the household. And she wanted to know where she could um, make changes and not undo everything she'd done. And I said, okay, so I'm going to tell you something as a store owner that most people are going to think I'm insane to tell you. But I think this is the right thing by your pet. And, I took the gamble of she could have stuck with this forever. She didn't. So, and she's still in my group. She's still a client. And I said, you need to look at Craigslist or any of the things like that where people have freezer burned meat. And she said, freezer burned meat? And I said, okay, hang on a second. Freezer burned meat just means that the top layer of the meat is burned by being frozen for too long. That's a taste thing that we humans don't like. Just like refreezing meat is a taste thing that we humans don't like. We perceive a noticeable difference, imaginary or not. We perceive a difference, and so it's a no-no for us. There's so many times that I have gotten food that it's still cold, but it's been defrosted. And then, for example, we'll defrost something and my husband goes, oh, I found the one that you defrosted. Crap. Well, I got little dogs, so I would have to throw one away. And I've had clients call me before, can I refreeze this? Yes, you can refreeze it. I will tell you, no dog has ever been like, ew, you refroze this. But if you go and you get freezer burned meat, and people will give it away most of the time, and even if they don't, it's pennies, literally, to get it. You go and you pick it all up and you utilize that, for the meals or to supplement whatever you're additionally feeding. And it buys you time. It buys you the ability to get through a period of time. Is it a full meal? Is it balanced? Depends on what you believe in. A lot of people are prey model raw, and so they feel like it doesn't have to have vegetables and all these other kind of things. But these are, again, things that are easy to feed. You can go to the grocery store and look at vegetation that would normally be in your dog's food, and maybe part of it is wilted, or it's just kind of like limp.
Mhm.
So, take it home, steam it, mix it in with your dog's food. They'll be fine with it. Trust me. I'm not telling you to go dumpster diving. Go. I do know a bunch of people who do that to feed their dogs, just like the people who will pick up roadkill. It just is about understanding. It's about your own um, barriers, your own mindset, and understanding that dogs are inherently scavengers, right? I mean, they're smart enough to eat what they find that, when they can find it and know the difference between when it's bad and when it's not. And even if they don't, they eat something bad, their body is built to eject that,
Right.
negative thing. So I work with everybody at every point. It doesn't matter to me if you're somewhere in a part of the country that it's common in your area to pick up roadkill. I have a list of caveats of make sure this, make sure that, those kinds of things. If you're the kind of person that you still want to feed raw and you're not sure how to balance it, I've got guidelines for that. There's no absolute. You're only limited to by the barriers, the box that you put yourself into that you won't think outside of. And the reason that's important is because my barrier is bug food, which you're big on. But that's my barrier. I don't think that I'll step outside of that as long as I have other options. But can I tell you that I haven't had a cat snap at a fly and swallow it? Or, I haven't had a dog see a bug and go, tasty, and pick that
Yeah.
right up. And I'm like, ew, gross, don't kiss me, kind of a thing. But that's my barrier. And,
Sure.
and the irony to that is, so let me see if I understand this right. You won't let your dog kiss you after they eat a bug, but you do know your dog licks its butt, right? Can I tell
Right.
you also how many clients, shockingly, I mean, I guess it's not that many in comparison, in relative to how many clients I've had, but I'm nevertheless so taken aback when clients tell me, oh, my dog doesn't lick their butt.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Denial. It's a great
Yeah.
state.
Well, I want to hit on something you said earlier too about the freezer burn and other things, roadkill, all the rest of that. So we were doing filming with a wildlife rescue, and they had big animals, big carnivores. And I will tell you, they relied on anything and everything. Donations from the stores that had gotten past the sell date and couldn't sell it, they would donate to them. They had hunters who would bring in things. Um, and yeah, to your point, there was none of those animals were like, "Where'd you get this? Can I see a receipt? Was this on sale?" That just doesn't happen in the wild. So when those, especially who want to cling to it's all about the wild diet. It's a wild diet. That's also too. You hit on something, and I know at some point we got to dive into the whole diet discussions, but you know, keep in mind most of these creatures are eating vegetation and other things that are getting mixed into their systems. So, it's not just, hey, do it because it's a nice filler or it's a nice this or a nice that. What I will say is that there is a wonderful ability for the animal systems to absorb what they need, expel what they don't. And so for me, that's I feel very comfortable. And balance, I it's so funny because I it's a balance is kind of a myth to me.
Me too.
Um, yeah, it's a wonderful goal and idea, but there is like show me the exact balance of anything. But it's just such a
Well, some people can. Some
okay.
people can show you that exact. I mean, there are veterinarians out there who they make it their mission to balance out recipes. And
And
I appreciate that.
yeah,
I
I
do.
was just gonna say, yeah, I love that that's what they're aiming for, and it's better than not doing anything by
Right.
far. But I will also say,
It's not
um,
reality.
yeah, and also too, let's watch these people over their 30-year career and see if changes happen. And I will bet that changes will happen in their approach and how they get to that balance because we're learning constantly. We're learning new things. We're seeing, hey, we've got this, we've got that. I had someone the other day, speaking of balance, say, "Oh yeah, I formulate using one of the AI systems now," and I was like, "Whew, you have extreme faith in that. I don't have that."
Well, AI is never wrong. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because it only gets the best input of information out there.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, bottom line is, so I also think too, I'm just a big believer in that synergistic, holistic approach of everything contributes to your space and those in that space with you. And if you're stressing out, I don't care how balanced it is, you're feeding that stress energy to your pet. And it's I'll share a little personal. Wife is sick right now, so I slept on the couch last night. And Belle came downstairs
That's
after.
not why you slept on the couch.
Well, yeah, sure. No, she may have been faking the cough and the sneezing and all the rest of it. But I was like, I'm heading downstairs. I'm gonna sleep on the couch. And the funny thing was, Belle was like, "How dare you?" Um, but literally, came down, half hour later, snuggled into me. We had just this great, sleep. It was truly wonderful. But I know if I did that 3 or 4 or 5 nights in a row, my back, my neck, my everything is going to hurt. That is why anything done sustainable over time, which is why I get the concern that people have. Oh my gosh, I'm switching up things. But again, having that grace, Belle and I were both up at sunrise today because we had a positive energy. We both slept really good, snuggled into each other. It wasn't because we slept in the most comfortable couch ever created. So sometimes, I just think that stuff is lost as well. And I always tell people, do the best you can and love them as, hard as you can. Be there. Don't skip on that walk. Yeah, it's a tough day. It's a this or that. Get out. You'll see how your mood changes from nothing else other than being in that positive energy of your pet. Same thing when you're feeding. Same thing when you're looking at vet costs. You're looking at grooming costs. You're looking at all these other things. That's where I flipped it with the bathing Bell. Hey, it's a great time for me, my daughter, and Belle. We go, we do it. Belle loves to splash us by shaking herself off. She thinks it's hilarious. We're wearing these bibs. Um, it's a fun experience. So flip how you're viewing things as well when you're facing these challenges. And I think there is a uh, benefit to doing that it just isn't hit on enough.
Here's why I think the balance thing is not as critical as some people like to insist that it is. If you look at the people that can live to their 90s that smoke and drink,
Yep.
and then you look at the athletes that live to 40 and they have a heart attack while they're out running or something like that. There's so many other factors. You could do everything quote unquote right for the moment, but your genetics, who you are, all of that has a heavy, heavy influence. So I've had a cat that lived to 24. Most of my dogs lived to between 16 and 18, 19. My last one that I put down was 21. And, were they ate some processed food when they were young and I didn't know any better and they survived it. They, I made their food every night, all 12 dogs for a year so I could learn how to make it. Was it perfectly balanced? No, I was learning. There have been now tests and scrutiny on some of the brands out there that are very popular that maybe aren't as balanced as people think. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that, if you have nachos one night for dinner and then, you don't want anything else, are you going to die because you fell off the grid for, one night or two or three? I mean, it just doesn't work that way. To the grooming thing, and I love that you brought up the self washes. I can only imagine how hairy y'all must be by the time you're done. But more than that, I used to have people that when they were cutting back, they would tell me, I can't afford the grooming. Okay. So I pay a groomer, so I don't have a lot of leeway there, but we can maybe adjust the service. And the
Right.
service would be, can you wash the dog no later than the day before so the dog is still clean? because groomers don't want to use their tools on dirty animals, or the day of, and then bring the dog in? Or can we just maybe do the sani, the nails, some trim the feet kind of thing? Does that work for you? And you can do the rest. And people are like, you do that? Yes, we do
Yeah.
that. Ideally, does a facility want to charge you for the full service? Of course they do. But if you can't, I can't really wrap my head around anybody who would rather lose a client than work with them in a time of need. And I was really strict about, really, on the only part of that was you can't have washed your dog 2 weeks ago,
Right.
and then come in and expect us to do any of those things, like a trim or something. Like, some people would want a full trim, but they'd wash the dog. Okay, I'm not just doing sani, nails, that sort of thing, trim the feet. You want me to trim the whole dog. My groomer doesn't want to do that,
Yeah.
because we don't know how clean your dog is. So, and then you also have the issue, we need to inspect the dog for fleas and that kind of thing. So there's some caveats there. But if you're open-minded, as, again, thinking outside the box as the pet parent, and you go to the facility that you like best and say, hey, listen, I just really can't afford this, and I really don't want to go away because I love you guys and I love, Sally the groomer. So is there something we can work out? And maybe they go get Sally and she comes out and says, yeah, we can do
Yeah.
this, this, and this. I know your dog really well. They don't need all this. Sometimes maybe you can go twice as long. I had the luxury of, because I built in groomers, that my dogs could be groomed anytime, right? So I had dogs that were groomed twice a week. And now, because my groomer is not local and she comes into me, I have to extend that out. So it's a good 10 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks before I see the groomer. And there's things that I have to do in between. And it's an adjustment. It's what you do for whatever the circumstances are. Is it ideal? No, but we're not talking about ideal. We're talking about how to still take care of your animals and survive the inflation
Yeah.
of cost of everything.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that you mentioned that. One of the great things is that where we take and bathe her, they'll trim her nails for her.
Oh,
And
perfect.
that's just a small, I think it's like $10,
Yeah.
even less. But, she'll also, if I asked her to, she would do the ears, do the anal
Hmm.
gland, you know.
Right.
So that, and to your point, that's why I go there. You
Right.
know, I love it. They're a grooming place and they have self-wash. And so, yeah, so long story short is there are always alternatives. We know you all are just feeling a lot of pressures. I mean, the world is just, we got to let a little steam out because it's certainly bubbling up quite a bit. Um, don't let this be another boiling point for you, because honestly, the greatest thing about being a pet parent is just being in their presence, just sharing the love back and forth, getting that energy. Man, maybe I need to get groomed. I sound like a hippie, huh? But the reality is, it's true. That's what I really prioritize. And I love that you said over time you've also adapted. So have I, and I've really had to come around to I impact all of these different things, and we've never even talked about water. But anyway, on all that, what a great conversation. Great suggestions there, Lauren, as always. Thank you so much for everybody out there that's listening. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon here on Practical Pet Chat.
Thanks, everybody.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk.
Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.